Good afternoon and welcome to Hope for the Holidays. This is our winter series. Hope for the Holidays ideas to help us create and not stress over winter break. My name is Tim Marple. I'm the director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs, and we are putting on this series in conjunction with our good friends over at the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin, as well as the Waisman Center. So we're excited that we're able to come together and offer this three-part series to you. We've talked a little bit about navigating winter holidays and extended families, navigating traditions and changes in routine. Today, we're going to move on to talk about moving, sensing, and feeling. Before we go, I do want to let everybody know that we are being recorded, and this will be posted later on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So because we're being recorded, please be careful of any personally identifiable health information that you might have, as we prefer to not have names or any personal identifiable information out on the recording. Thank you very much for that. Also a reminder that I am not a medical professional. I am not a health professional. I am hosting conversations with people that want to help make your life a little bit better. Nothing that we say takes the place of any legal or medical advice that you may have been given by a professional. So that being said, I am excited that you are here, and I am excited to welcome Jen Bluske. Jen, by the way, I kept pronouncing your name differently last week. How do you pronounce your last name, Jen?
You're exactly right, Bluske. Yep.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I got one right for a change. This is good. I can go play the lottery later. Jen Bluske is an occupational therapist and the director of the Children's Therapy Network in Madison. She provides relationship-based therapy for children with autism spectrum disorder and believes in the power of movement strategies. Whole family regulate together. Jen, welcome. I am really interested to hear what you have to say, because I am not one of the most active people in the world. So I will be listening actively to hear what you have to say today. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Just going to share my screen here so you don't have to just look at my big head. Very excited to talk to you guys today. I could talk about sensory regulation forever, so I'm going to do a really good job of keeping it to 30 minutes. Given that, a couple of things. If a question pops up specific that's specific to you, feel free to ask it to me right in the moment. Obviously, don't give out any identifiable information, but if there's something that you're curious about in the moment, I'm happy to answer in the moment. I find that we have the best conversations that way, and we're learning how to do this all via Zoom now. The other thing I want to just kind of preface this with is my goal in speaking with you guys today is not to send you home with a list of things you need to do. This time of year, that's sort of the last thing we all need, is a list of things to do. What I would like everybody to be thinking about instead is what we're already doing and what we're already seeing our kids do, and maybe use some additional understanding to make it a little bit more effective, or to decrease stress, increase joy, increase participation. So when I look at the sensory systems, it's not about prescribing 7 sensory things to do. It's about what are we doing? What kind of movement is our kids needing? What are our kids asking for already that we can just step in and support? So that's the lens I'm looking at today. I will be giving some ideas, but that's not just so you have some, but the goal is to just kind of get the brain percolating a little bit about what's already going on. So let's make sure my PowerPoint is working here. Whoa, it's very much working. All right. So what does this holiday season bring to us, right? I know Erin went over this as well, but from a sensory and a relational perspective, the holiday season, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? The good of the holiday season is sometimes we have more time, we have more downtime to be able to do some of the things that our busy lives don't allow. Especially, I really am thinking about this year for our kids on the spectrum who are in intensive programs. A lot of times, a lot of those therapies, they really dip down during that holiday season. So there's this time that everybody has, which again can be really good and really, really hard as well. So I have the box fort. We have time to do some of the things that we might not usually have the time to do. This time of year, right, COVID aside, we're often seeing new people. There's new interactions happening, family, or not new people, but people we don't see as often, which just brings a layer of relationship difference in. We might be baking, we might be having different sensory tactile experiences. You know, there's wrapping paper and there's all those things that go on, which I always think about for my kids with sensory differences. We have outside time, right? We've got the cold, we've got having to bundle up. We've got, you know, increased resistance with snow. You know, it just snowed, so now we got a lot of snow to be marching through. And then we have my little green COVID bug here, right? Which is throwing a wrench in everything right now. We have just a lot of change that happens over the holidays from that sensory perspective. The other thing I really, really talk to my families I work with about when I'm looking at how do we keep our kids and ourselves regulated through the holiday from a sensory perspective is thinking about what our expectations are. Oftentimes, and there's no judgment around our expectations, but just being aware with ourselves of what our expectations might be. So the things I thought about, you know, holiday traditions, the obvious one is baking. You know, sometimes baking is a big deal for a family. For some kids, my son was one, baking was fabulous because he was a tactile seeker. He loved the tactile input and he would be covered head to toe in cookie dough every time. And I just needed to honor, like, that's how he bakes. He's 15 now and he still bakes that way. He still is in it. Canceled therapies, you know, kids might not be getting the movement that they inherently get during their therapies. Balancing working from home with having kids home, right? We're all doing that right now. So if your child doesn't have maybe the self-directed ideas of what to do for movement, we might need to be finding ways to give them that while doing something else. Sometimes holiday expectations are rest and relaxation, right? Sometimes it's just a big old break from having to do all the things, both again for ourselves and for our kids. So that could be a double-edged sword, right? Getting a break also sometimes decreases our routines, but getting a break and being cozy for a little bit in our bodies can be really therapeutic and helpful. Travel, right? Travel, most of us aren't going to be doing as much travel this year, but if travel is a consideration, extended family who may use touch differently, you know, this is the grandma who's going to like come up and hug you unexpectedly. For kids with sensory differences, that might be a thing that we want to think about. So I encourage my families to just really think about what are our expectations for the holidays and what are the sensory components of those? What are the sensory differences? And we're going to go into those sensory systems in about 5 minutes here. And make sure that we understand about what are the differences, and that often helps us figure out what we want to do, what we want to add, how we want to support. All right, so what can we do to make everybody feel safe and successful? One thing that I didn't write down in this presentation, but is important, is our first job in life is to feel safe, and our sensory systems is what gives us that information. So with potential sensory change over the holidays, our job as parents, I'm assuming I'm speaking to mostly parents in this group, or providers, is to help kids understand their sense, what's coming in, or to modulate it for them. How can we feel safe, successful with holidays? First, we need to have our bodies regulated, right? Does my body feel good, right? Does it feel good because I'm cozied in, or am I cozied in too much and I need to move my body? Is the sensory information that's coming in feel okay? Is it safe for me? Examples being is a really crowded environment, a really loud family environment. That can sometimes, in my sensory system, that might feel okay, but in a child's sensory system, especially one with auditory defensiveness, that's going to feel really unsafe. And so you're going to hear me reference over and over is we need to have perspective on what's going on for our kids. So really the most important thing you can do is observe what they're doing already. What sensory input are they getting or trying to remove from their environment?
It just strikes me as you're talking sensory. One of the things that I usually experience this year, probably not so much, but going over to people's house who like to keep their house at a separate temperature than my house is kept at. And so I can find myself all of a sudden feeling very warm and very uncomfortable. And I understand why. But I know sometimes when my kids were growing up, we go to a relative's house that just really liked a warm house in winter. They just be like, Dad, why is it so hot? And so remembering to plan for
Yeah,
the fact that relative A really likes a warm house or relative B likes a cold house. Make sure I pack those sweaters, taking into account just a different temperature
that's a
people keep their
perfect
houses
example.
at.
That's a perfect example because if your sensory system isn't working well for you, temperature is one that you often don't pick up on or can't verbalize. So we actually, yeah, you're going to dress in layers, especially for your kids. You might just dress less if it's really hot. The other thing is our our vagus nerve, which calms us, is supported by cold. So offering ice chips, cold drinks, things like that. It's helpful. I didn't know if somebody was talking. Okay. Yes, that's a huge one. And so my biggest take home is observe your kids, observe what's happening in your body, because that's going to give you the hints. Safe regulated relationships. I bring this one up because this is the way kids learn to regulate, is through their safe relationships, which is their parent and then, other caregivers as well. So regulating yourself is going to be another key. If you can get yourself regulated, you're going to help your child stay regulated and have a good time. And then balancing known versus unknown, right? So this is that delicate balance between having that routine and having a little bit of freedom. Again, for our kids who are in really intense therapies, ABA therapy, things like that, when that's pulled away, that can just feel really disorganizing. And so really thinking through how can I keep some semblance of a routine without being rigid for our kids. And I know Erin went over that as well, but those are the three areas that are going to help us regulate. So I keep looking at the clock because I like to talk, but I'm doing good. So, all right. So really what I'm going to do in the next couple of slides is I'm going to have you think about the sensory system. So we're going to go over some ideas, and then we're also going to talk about some relationship strategies, because as I've alluded to, sensory systems don't happen in isolation. So that's a mistake that people get, is that we just apply a sensory input and it does the same thing every time. That's not true. The sensory input works with the relational partner to effect a change. So this is why one person can do heavy work with a child and they'll regulate, and another person can do heavy work with a child and they'll zing up, they'll get dysregulated. It's really about ourselves. So that is a huge piece and a huge key. All right, let's just start pulling off the systems here. Let's start with an easier one, auditory, right? So when we're thinking about the holidays, what we can do, what comes up, I always think of crowds of people. Again, this year, I think people are going to get less of it. But thinking about, some of our families can be pretty loud. And in my house, everybody talks and nobody listens. And in my auditory system, that's often too much. I find myself needing to run to the bathroom more frequently than usual, right? Do you have any kids of your own that are doing that, right? That's a strategy. And sometimes our body tells us we need to go more just to regulate. Having an opportunity to step outside to the car to get something, having an opportunity to go for a walk when we're in a group situation wherein it's too much. This is the moment that if you have the noise canceling headphones, bring them, right? This is the moment that, yes, use those noise canceling headphones if you need them. The other thing I like to think about from an auditory perspective is we can use auditory to regulate through rhythm. And rhythm does more than just auditory, but for simplicity, adding rhythmic things to our day. So this is, if it's a younger child or even an older child, adding rhythmicity to your voice, adding prosody to your voice, we're heading out the door, can help regulate. And so these are just things I like to think about when we're talking about auditory. Okay. Are you looking at the chat too? Or should
I will.
Okay.
No. I will be keeping a chat on the
okay, cool.
chat. We keep an eye on chat. I just put in the chat that, yes, I realized that I muted everybody to cut down on some background noises. But if you have a question or comment, please feel free to unmute. I'm watching the screen with participants, so I'll see you unmute. But if you accidentally unmute, I'm going to probably call on you. So just know that if you unmute, and I see it, I'm probably going to call on you. If I don't, please feel free to just gently interrupt, or feel free to put in the chat box, hey, I got a question. So I'll then, make sure that I'll call on you, or put it in the chat box. I'll ask it for you if you don't feel like having your voice recorded. Jen, this rhythmic thing is something that's relatively, that I don't know a lot about. Would you mind talking a little bit more about the importance of rhythm, either in our voice or having rhythmic movement?
Sure. Rhythm is one of those very, very early regulators. So think about mama's heartbeat in the womb. Think about what we do to babies. We sway, we pat, right? It's a very, 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 we shush babies rhythmically. So it's a very, very early regulator. So rhythm comes in right auditorily. It's going to come in tactily. It's going to come in proprioceptive and vestibular. So it's not just one sensory input, but rhythmicity. And then when you think about rhythm, there's a rhythm to most everything in life, right? There's a rhythm to sleep-wake cycles. There's hunger satiation of interactions, right? There's a rhythm of an interaction. And so we use rhythmicity here almost as its own standalone sensory strategy. And again, the ways you can add rhythmicity is infinite, right? We add it with voice. Sometimes I will just sit and tap my leg as I'm interacting, or if a kid is really, really dysregulating, I might just start tapping. We use balls, back and forth, anything that can go back and forth, to add rhythmicity. Some of the games that parents play, like I'm going to throw you on the bed, crash. I'm going to throw you on the bed, right? That's rhythmicity. Yep. So anything that has that, the peekaboo game is rhythmic. And so if you think about how you can add rhythm to your day, it's actually, once you kind of like put it on the top of mind, you can add rhythm everywhere, and it is always going to be organizing for the system. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a really fun one. It's a fun one to play with. Tactile. Let's talk about the tactile system. So, right, we have the two sides of the coin. We have the unexpected, unknown, unsafe feeling of touch, right? This is the unexpected touch. This is somebody coming up from behind us and not understanding that it's coming in. This is having to wear like the clothes for the special event, or the family picture that are just horrible on your body, right? So there's, again, we need to be aware. Like, do we need to be putting some clothes in the dryer for our kids if we're hoping that they get something different on, so that there's neutral warmth on their body? Do we need to give them a whole lot of extra squeezes and squishes before they go into an environment where they might be bumped into? Can we increase tactile input by, having kids help bake and cook and that kind of thing? For some of the kids, getting their hands in whatever needs to be squished and rolled can be really, really powerful and important. Don't forget about bathtub shower time. It's a great time to add tactile input, right? It's just a natural way. Again, I don't know that I want people doing one more thing at this time of year. It's not helpful. It's about doing what you're already doing, but just doing it a little different, having a different perspective. Don't forget about oral tactile.
Mm-hmm. No, you just remind me that one of the things that I noticed with my kids when they were growing up is there seemed to be, around this time, with all the changes with family, with the movement, with the sounds, they may become a little more clingy. Yep. They just want to touch me. They just want to be in proximity to me. And to understand that that's a need, I don't have to make a big deal about it. They don't always want to be picked up and hugged. They just want to be physically in communication with me. And so understanding that and just going with that, again, not making a big deal out of it, but just
a different perspective. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, of course they're going to want to be close to me. Everything else is different. I'm the only consistent. Okay. This isn't some new thing we have to work through. It's just them getting their sensory needs met right now, right? Maybe they need to sit on the couch and cuddle a little bit more. All right. right? And so that's the mind shift that I'm hoping people can make. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I know my son, I'll reference my kids a lot, but he spent like much of the family gatherings like between my legs where I was able to squish him. It just worked for him. Mm-hmm. So oral tactile. So don't forget about oral tactile. That's the tactile input you get into your mouth. That's another big one that we like to think about. I want to talk about movement. Movement, right? So I combined the systems, right? This is vestibular, proprioceptive. The best thing I can say about this is make sure there's places for kids to move, right? Especially if you're seeing sort of unsafe behavior, right? If kids are climbing stuff and jumping, we're going to need to find somewhere for them to climb and jump. So get creative. Think about stairs. Think about, can they be safe? You got to watch. You got to make sure. Can you get a step stool? Can they go from a step stool into a couch cushion? It's not super intense, but a lot of times it can be done safely and it'll fill the need. My favorite movement is get outside, right? I know it's freezing cold right now, and I'm hoping that it warms up a little bit, but get outside, get on park benches, get walking over stumps, get going on trails, get places where kids can explore with different types of movement. My favorite, and the thing I will tell all families is go find a nature trail, go to the Arboretum, go find somewhere in nature where the kids can, because that is going to be what gives you all your senses, right? That's going to it's going to circle all your senses in. Now I realize it's super cold, so it's probably not as easy in this week, but from a movement perspective, that's important. Don't forget the power of blankets. Blankets in your home, you can do a million things with blankets, right? You can pull kids on them. You can play tug of war with a blanket. You can cover yourself up and be found with a blanket. You can make a fort with the blanket. So the power of blankets and couch cushions. In our practice, we actually don't recommend a bunch of the fancy sensory stuff every once in a while, but usually what's in the house is gonna work. The other thing that's important is pay attention to if your kids are putting themselves upside down. Upside down is another really intense sensory input that if kids are seeking, honor that. Make sure it's safe, right? But honor that. That's a nice way for kids to get their movement needs met.
Are you trying to tell me that growing up, when I used to sit with my feet on the couch, my back against it, and my head on the floor, that I was trying to regulate my body? I just thought I was weird.
Oh yeah, absolutely you were. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Good to know. I learned something today. Yeah, no, I always used to do that. So that's regulating.
And the funny thing is as adults, we start being like trained out of doing some of the things that really work for us. I mean,
yeah. And thinking of movement, my favorite movement around this time of year is just dancing. It's just the great Christmas songs that make them on the holiday songs. And just saying there's no rules.
Good old
just dance. Just move your body. And so I will take dance breaks from work.
Dance breaks. It's a perfect way.
With the Zoom off.
Yes, right.
Absolutely.
Right. Yes. And what I always say with movement is watch what your kids are already doing. They often give us clues of what they need. They just need a little bit of support to get the intensity they need. And so our kids give us the answers. From a sensory perspective, they already often tell us. Are they seeking out small spaces? Are they finding like the crevices of places and putting themselves there? That's a hint. Are they climbing things and perching up really high? That's a hint. Again, we can't climb things that aren't safe, but can we find a way to get taller? Can we stand on the stool and do something? Or can we, be on a bed? Let's see, we talked about auditory vision. The thing I like to say about vision is, right, around the holidays, everything looks different, right? We've got stuff in the house. It's usually crowded and cluttered because there's things all over the place. The decorations change. Give kids their space of where their visual known is, right? Is this a bedroom? Is this a crick behind the couch? Is this, kids often use their screens to get their visual known, right? That's what that's often about, is like, this is known to me. I understand this is, so it's comfortable. Let's find ways that they can find their visual knowns. And visual schedules is an obvious one, right? If organizing vision through vision is important, which it is for a lot of kids with a diagnosis of autism, use that skill of vision, of organizing visually. Mm-hmm. You might see some more like visual lining up-y stuff. Again, honor that like right now, this is a way they're organizing their bodies. And, you know, and maybe offer some other visual activities as well. The last sensory system I want to talk about before we have just a couple minutes for a relationship, which will be good, is our olfactory system, our sense of smell. I bring this up because around the holidays, there's so many new and unknown smells, right? We have the Christmas candles, and we've got the Christmas soap, and we've got the baking, and we've got new foods that are baking. Again, we need to be aware of that. We can't always change it. I usually become very direct about it with kids. Wow, that's a different smell. That to me smells like X. If we can't change it in the moment, I just get real clear about what it is. Make it a known. And then I help kids find a way to take a break from it if they can, right? So this is where, can you step outside for a minute? Can you use an essential oil if you have any that feels better for the kids? Mm-hmm. So smells is just one I always bring up because it's super closely related to emotion. And kids often can't verbalize it. They don't always connect in that, oh, that smell is what's really bothering me. So we need to be a little bit better at honoring it for them.
That's interesting. That may be why every so often I stick my head out my back door.
Yeah.
So I may want to think about what my house is smelling like that I need to get a new breath. But I hadn't thought about that, is that sometimes maybe we need a break.
We need
all
to
the smells that are inundating us.
Yeah. And it's one that is really hard to sort of like think through and verbalize for a lot of people. We don't, because it doesn't hit our cognitive centers the same way. It goes directly to our emotion centers. So it's processed different. So anyway. All right, last slide for just a few minutes, because I think we're okay on time. So this one's just as important as sensory, right? So I went over some sensory ideas, the way to think about sensory, but relationship strategies are just as important as our sensory strategies when we're looking at regulation. Like, how do we stay regulated within all of these holiday things that are happening, or things that aren't happening, right? Our changes in routine. The first one I think about is attunement, right? So attunement is the parent, the caregiver, ability to really tune in to the child's need, right? So it's a little bit maybe more simple to think about in an infant, right? So an infant cries, and most parents can be like, oh, that's a hungry cry, or ooh, they're really tired. That's an attuned parent, right? You can pick up on those subtleties. With our kids with autism and sensory difference, sometimes it's really hard to attune in, right? They're giving us really inconsistent cues sometimes. And so I spend a lot of time, step one is just try to understand what's going on, what they're coming from. In order to attune, you kind of have to, for a moment, put on pause your goal, right? So if you're trying to get out the door, trying to put the shoes on, right? And the shoes are banging on the floor, right? You need to get out the door because you're trying to get to the event on time. If you're going to attune in, it's stopping and pausing and scanning the environment, scanning the child, and coming up with a theory is like, does it feel too yucky on their foot? Or are they too overwhelmed to do the plan of putting the shoe on, right? Like, come up with your theory. And then oftentimes I'm like, man, I wonder if that shoe's hard to put on. If I get it right, if I attune in well with a child and I'm able to get it, that usually regulates them right through it, right? But I had to let go of my goal of like, put your shoe on for a minute, right? So not that I'm going to let go of the goal. We still have to put our shoes on, get out the door, right? So there's attuning. And again, like I said, it's really hard sometimes to attune when you're attuning to somebody with sensory processing differences, because they're so different than our personal experience. Even if for kids, what you want them to know is, I understand what's going on for you, or I am trying to understand what's going on for you, right? If we can't get it, and we can't always get it, I'm trying to understand your experience. That doesn't mean I'm not the parent, and that doesn't mean you still don't have to put your shoe on, but I'm going to potentially support it in another way. Does that make sense? So that's kind of that attunement. Consistency, we talked about consistency a little bit. Continue to be pretty consistent in your reactions, right? How we react, our consistent reactions is super important. I find this hard as a parent during the holidays because I just kind of like want to shut off, I want to be, right? But that consistency is important, and then creating that rhythm to the day. So even if all the therapies and all the daily routine is gone, having that flow of the day is still important. So this might be the bedtime routine is still the same. It might be the wake up routine is still the same, or might be some sort of flow of the day. These long periods of no flow can be really hard for kids, right? Models care, right? So I hope I've alluded to this a million times already today. This sensory stuff doesn't just happen for our kids, right? This happens for us too. And so part of our job as parents, and I would argue one of the biggest jobs if we're trying to help our children regulate, is to learn how to regulate ourselves. Because if we're not regulated, I promise you, your child won't regulate with you. That's not going to happen because that's not how regulation develops. So this is the time to start thinking through what feels good for me and what do I know works, right? Do I need to just sit on the couch a lot more right now? Or do I know that when I sit on the couch, it's really not good for me? So I am going to get up and get outside one time a day. I'm going to walk to get the mail and back. I'm paying attention to the tools that work for you. Even something as simple as taking a big old deep breath yourself when you're dysregulating. 99% of the kids are going to follow. They're going to take a big old deep breath with you. Now, if you tell them to take a deep breath, they usually aren't able to, can't find their breath, right? Because that's just way too cognitive. But if you take that breath, those mirror neurons are often going to kick in and do it for them. So this is the time to just really think through what you need, right? The holidays can be a little much sometimes. And if you need to go at a slower pace, if you need to sit on the couch and relax more, if you need to have the dance party, do that for yourself, model for your kids. And if you're having a rough day, honor that. Man, today's kind of tricky. Whew. Kids with sensory differences who are highly attuned in that way, and our kids with autism, they know if what you're thinking on the inside is not what you're saying on the outside. And that'll lead to dysregulation. So just say it in a way that honors and is respect to yourself and them, but it's okay to just say it. Co-regulation. So co-regulation is our ability to use our state of regulation to regulate somebody else, and vice versa. So this is our superpower when we're regulating our kids. We can use our regulation to regulate them, which is why you need to do self-care so you stay regulated for your kids. And so this is when you have a child who's dysregulating and from a sensory perspective, starting to have a hard time. If you can attune and then regulate yourself down, oftentimes that will help them regulate. Okay, so I do whole half-day presentations on that, but I didn't want to leave that out because it's so important. Again, just doing heavy work, but if heavy work with somebody who's regulating through the heavy work will be the thing that helps. Okay, and then the last one, and my most favorite, is shared joy. So creating moments of shared joy. Creating moments of shared joy is actually a resiliency factor that they're finding for both trauma work and for relationship work. So finding tiny moments of shared joy actually kind of fills the tank, the regulatory tank a little bit, so to speak. So I'm talking the little moments. You don't need to put pressure on yourself to have this lovely, amazing, organized activity with your child to create joy. I'm talking the moments of shared joy where You know, they may have, you know, rolled the car across the floor and it crashed, and you might glisten with them and with their, you know, with your face and do it too, right? That's what I'm talking about. These little moments of shared joy have such a huge effect on our neurotransmitters that they're just a resiliency factor and can help us get through a little bit harder times. So usually with shared joy, I encourage families to join your kids in the silly, safe, fun things they're doing, even if it seems real weird. Sometimes the things they come up with is kind of better than the things we come up with. So from a play perspective. So that's what I have in a nutshell. What do you guys have for questions?
So please feel free to unmute and ask your questions out loud. I'll do my best to navigate that or put them in the chat box. We'll ask them for you. But really interested in, you know, have you used any of these strategies? Are any of these working for you? Was there anything new that you might want to try to implement this year of any sort of feedback?
And I find that the strategies parents tell me that they use are so powerful. You know, usually like they're things that are just brilliant. So yeah, if you have strategies that work, love to hear them.
I've, of course, interrupted quite often during the thing, so I have all my questions answered. You know, I do just want to say I love the focus on relationship. I think you're right. I think that sometimes not to put pressure on them. Yeah. You know, just don't need any more pressure on them, but to remember that I can help affect the situation just by my actions, just by my reactions. That I have some control over that regulation. To be able to help my child regulate means that I have to regulate. Not in a bad way. I mean, it's not like regulation's bad for us. You know, it's really good to keep our bodies, you know, moving forward at a nice pace. Sometimes you may need to sprint. I'm thinking if an animal is chasing you, that's about the only time I can think of a sprint. But kids seem to want to go really fast sometimes. Well, okay, go really fast with them.
Right. If in the moment it makes sense and it's safe, and it's mostly appropriate, why not? Yep, why not? The other thing is if people end up having any questions that I'll give you, but you're also always welcome to email me. I don't know if there's an email that I gave out, but that's another way.
Yep. If you are, you know, up to you. If you want to share the PowerPoint, like, I would love to be able to send it out to the people that are here. That would be fantastic. So we do have a comment in the chat box. Hearing your suggestions on incorporating strategies into daily activities. I'm still interested in your favorite websites or resources for kid activities, especially if broken down by the categories mentioned. Thanks for your time. So if you have any resources or favorite websites that you use, that would be either great right now if you have time, or if you give them to me, I'll make sure that I send them out with the PowerPoint.
What I'll do is I will go ahead, I'll just add a slide. Usually I have it. I'll add a slide to the PowerPoint with a couple of just like the lists of ideas kind of stuff. I don't put those in anymore because there's so many websites that do it. Yes, I will do that.
But I want to know the ones you like. I want to make sure they're the good ones.
Well, here's the thing: is once you start looking from this perspective, you stop using the lists because you just follow what the child does and shift it. And so that's why we stopped giving them out. But it's a great starting point to have, like, you know, I printed and put it on the fridge. And so if you're out of ideas, you know what I mean? But it's a different way of looking at it.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then we did have another question. Can you just clarify, talk a little bit more about how the brain and those mirror neurons or the neurons are impacted by shared joy? It's kind of a new concept to me too. Could you just expand on that a bit?
Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting. Again, can you still get it? I don't think you can. I just did something. Anyway, so when sensory information comes into your brain, I'm going to try to say this. When sensory information comes into your brain, the first thing it does is says, is it safe or not safe, right? And if it's safe, then it's processed up here, processed in the front. If it's unsafe, then you go into a fight, flight, or a limbic kind of place. What shared joy does, what that social relationship mirror neuron thing does, is it pulls that information to something called, it kind of pulls it up into your prefrontal cortex, which has the ability to change your body's reaction to sensory input. So it actually can create a new, think of it as new wiring in your brain. So when you create this moment of shared joy, it takes that sensory information that may have been tagged as a little unsafe and turns it into a social engagement. And what that does is it helps rewire. It helps rewire how the information is coming in so that you don't get stuck in an unsafe limbic brainstem place. So what I'm talking, if anybody wants to write it out, I'm talking polyvagal theory. Yep. So that's the underpinnings of this. But that shared joy is what creates those networks, or one of the things that can create those networks.
Thanks. I don't know if that was because it was a lot.
Sorry.
No. I don't mean that. That came out of my mouth, and I'm like, well, you sucked him. That was just horrible. No, I don't know if that like answered a question about how it's impacted by shared joy, but it's just so interesting to me that we have the opportunity and that our brains have the tools to rewrite, to say, okay, I am used to this being a negative situation, but with enough positive input and with people coming along with me in that positive input, then I can change how I react
exactly
to that.
Yes.
And that is fascinating to me. I love
which is why I don't talk about sensory processing by itself anymore, because we're missing it if we're not talking about the other pieces.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I loved what you said earlier too about, sensory doesn't take place in a vacuum. Is we are surrounded by people. They're constantly impacting our sensory systems. Sometimes good, sometimes bad.
Exactly.
But yes, sensory doesn't happen alone.
Yep, exactly. I have some YouTube videos up that are longer that can describe some of this more. I will also put those references on in case people want more.
No. I mean, I thought it was really, nothing like asking somebody to explain the polyvagal theory in 30 seconds.
Right.
Come on, right? Right? Why not?
Let me just start
Why not?
this.
Why not? We didn't even like to go get your brain structure to show us. So,
I know. I was like, well, here's the brain.
Yes, going back to the
story's going right back, yeah.
Oh my gosh. See, I could just do this all afternoon, and this is why you have to have an upper limit, because I'll just talk to people. Any other questions, comments out there? If not, I'm not seeing any frantic unmutes going on, nothing popping in the chat box. Well then, Jen, thank you so much. I apologize if I used poor wording there.
No.
Please, there was no poor intent.
It was a little wordy.
It's never going to come back again, because Tim said. But thank you so very much for taking time out of your schedule. This was really, yes, thank you. This was totally interesting and totally what I wanted. So thank you. It's like, when you think of stuff months ago and then they actually happen, it kind of makes me. So thank you so much for being here. And thank everybody else for being here. And Jen will get me some resources and the PowerPoint, and we'll get this posted and out. So thank you. I hope you have a happy holidays. If you did want to just hang on for a second, I'm going to close the recording. And then if there's any offline questions, we can always take those as well. Give me one moment. Thank you so much for being here.